There is a particular internal experience that very few men ever talk about, not because it is dramatic, but because it is difficult to explain without sounding detached from the world most people inhabit. It is not loneliness in the conventional sense, nor is it superiority or bitterness. It is something quieter, more understated, a persistent sense that you are moving through life on a different internal rhythm. You may have noticed this early, long before you had the language to describe it. Even when surrounded by people, conversations often felt shallow, repetitive, or strangely predictable. Not meaningless, but incomplete, as if they skimmed the surface of something deeper without ever reaching it. You listened more than you spoke, not out of shyness, but out of instinct. You noticed patterns in behavior, power dynamics, and emotional reactions long before others became aware of them. Over time, you realized that explaining these observations rarely led to understanding. More often, it led to confusion or resistance. So, quietly, you stopped explaining. This experience is not social anxiety, nor is it simple introversion, and it is certainly not arrogance. It is the awareness, often unspoken, that most social structures reward conformity, emotional performance, and external validation, while subtly discouraging independent thought and internal self-sufficiency. You sensed this without being taught. You felt it before you could name it. While others chased approval, you found yourself refining your skills, your discipline, and your inner stability. While others measured success through attention and recognition, you measured it through competence, autonomy, and psychological calm. Not because someone instructed you to do so, but because it felt natural, almost unavoidable. Men with this orientation often grow up feeling slightly misaligned with their environment. They are not rebels by temperament, yet they resist being absorbed into hierarchies that demand constant self-promotion or emotional signaling. They do not seek leadership roles, yet others often turn to them during moments of uncertainty. They do not announce their values, yet they live by them with a quiet consistency that does not require witnesses. Psychologically, this disposition is rare. It requires emotional regulation, delayed gratification, and a high tolerance for solitude. It also requires the ability to derive meaning without applause, a trait modern culture slowly erodes through noise, urgency, and comparison. If you have felt this internal separation not as pain, but as clarity, this is not an attempt to label you or elevate you. It is simply an accurate description, calm, precise, and grounded. What follows are 6 internal experiences that consistently appear in men who operate outside traditional dominance hierarchies. Not better men, not worse men, simply different. Point 1, you feel most clear when you are alone. For the Sigma male, solitude is not an escape from life, but a deliberate return to cognitive equilibrium, a state in which the mind is finally allowed to function as it was designed to. When external stimuli are reduced, your nervous system naturally downshifts from constant alertness into clarity. Thoughts begin to move in straight lines rather than scattering in reaction to noise, opinions, and expectations. Emotional responses slow down, becoming measured instead of impulsive. This is not a personality flaw or social withdrawal. It is a neurological preference. Psychological research on self-regulated individuals shows that some men process information more efficiently when they are not required to constantly engage, perform, or signal belonging. While many people experience silence as emptiness or boredom, you experience it as structure. In solitude, There is no pressure to explain yourself, defend your choices, or adjust your internal state to match the emotional climate of others. This absence of external calibration allows your identity to remain stable rather than situational. You are the same person alone as you are in the world, and over time this consistency builds a deep, unshakable sense of self-trust. You know how you think. You understand how you respond under pressure. You are familiar with your own internal rhythms. Because your inner world is not chaotic, you do not fear being alone with it. It is ordered, deliberate, and internally governed. This is why prolonged isolation does not erode you in the way it erodes others. Instead of weakening your sense of self, it sharpens perception, strengthens discipline, and reinforces independence. You begin to notice patterns others miss, motivations beneath behavior, and inefficiencies in systems that rely heavily on social validation. You're not dependent on praise, approval, or constant feedback to confirm who you are. This makes you psychologically resilient in environments that pressure men to constantly display value, compete for attention, or perform confidence rather than embody it. While others are unsettled without an audience, you stabilize. While others seek reassurance, you default to self-assessment. Solitude becomes the training ground where your clarity is refined, your emotional control is reinforced, and your autonomy is preserved. This is not detachment from life, it is preparation for it, on your own terms. Point 2, you notice power dynamics without participating in them. The Sigma male possesses a refined awareness of social hierarchies, yet this awareness does not translate into a desire to dominate others or submit himself to established ranks. You see the structure clearly, how authority is asserted, how influence circulates, and how status is defended through subtle behaviors, alliances, and signals. You understand the mechanics behind leadership, popularity, and control, but you remain internally detached from the emotional pull of these systems. Your self-worth is not tethered to titles, approval, or positioning. This inner separation creates what can be described as psychological mobility. You can step into organizations, groups, or social environments, function competently within them, read the dynamics accurately, and then step away without resentment, anxiety, or loss of identity. Many men become psychologically trapped by hierarchy, measuring their value against external metrics, and expending enormous energy trying to climb ladders that promise validation but rarely deliver fulfillment. You recognize this pattern early. Rather than chasing rank, you prioritize autonomy, clarity, and internal alignment. Because your sense of value is internally generated, you are far less susceptible to manipulation, peer pressure, or ego-based provocation. You are difficult to bait because you do not need to win symbolic battles to feel whole. This detachment often leads to misunderstanding. Others may label you distant, unmotivated, or socially indifferent because they assume ambition must always express itself through visible dominance or competition. In truth, your selectivity is deliberate. You allocate your psychological energy with precision, investing only in environments, goals, and relationships that do not require you to distort yourself to belong. You understand that power pursued for its own sake often becomes a form of dependency, tying a man to external validation, constant comparison, and fragile identity. By refusing to anchor yourself to hierarchy, you preserve freedom of movement, mentally, emotionally, and socially. You can cooperate without submission, lead without attachment, and walk away without bitterness. This posture does not make you passive, it makes you self-directed. Your strength lies not in controlling others, but in remaining internally sovereign, regardless of the structure you temporarily inhabit. Point 3, you dislike competition that lacks meaning. Your relationship with competition is deliberate, measured, and strategic, rather than impulsive or reactive. You do not shy away from challenges, but you refuse to engage in every contest presented to you. Instead, you filter challenges through a quiet internal calculus. Will this refine me or merely distract me? Surface-level rivalry, driven by ego, comparison, or social posturing, registers as inefficient. It generates noise without substance and movement without direction. To you, competing for visibility, approval, or status feels like expending energy on variables you do not control. When you do choose to compete, it is rarely against other people in the conventional sense. More often, it is against your former self, your previous limits, or within a carefully chosen domain where mastery compounds over time and produces durable returns. This orientation reflects a mature, cognitive framework rooted in long-term thinking rather than short-term gratification. In motivational psychology, researchers distinguish between extrinsic competition, which is fueled by external validation and social comparison, and intrinsic challenge, which is driven by the desire for competence, mastery, and self-alignment. The Sigma male operates almost entirely within this intrinsic domain. You are not motivated by applause or immediate recognition, but by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you are improving, refining, and deepening your capabilities. You are willing to work in obscurity, to move patiently, and to accept long periods where progress is invisible to others, because your reward is internal coherence rather than external affirmation. This often leads to misinterpretation. To observers who equate ambition with constant display, public wins, or aggressive self-promotion, you may appear passive, detached, or even unambitious. In reality, your ambition is simply structured differently. It is inward-facing, sustained, and disciplined rather than performative. You understand that true leverage is not built through loud competition, but through quiet accumulation of skill, knowledge, and strategic positioning. You recognize that power maintained privately is more stable than power broadcast publicly. By choosing when and where to compete, you conserve psychological energy, avoid unnecessary friction, and ensure that each effort contributes to a larger personal architecture. In this way, competition becomes a tool rather than an identity, something you engage with selectively, consciously, and always in service of long-term self-mastery rather than momentary dominance. Point 4, you rarely seek validation, even in relationships. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Sigma male psychology is the absence of validation-seeking behavior, a trait that is often misread as emotional distance or indifference when, in reality, it reflects a deeply rooted internal stability. This does not mean you are closed off, emotionally unavailable, or incapable of meaningful connection. It means your sense of worth is internally regulated rather than outsourced to external approval. Your confidence is not fueled by praise, reassurance, or constant affirmation, but by a quiet self-trust developed through reflection, experience, and self-mastery. In relationships, this fundamentally alters your priorities. You value mutual respect, consistency, emotional maturity, and personal accountability over admiration, attention, or superficial approval. You are not drawn to dynamics that require you to perform, impress, or constantly reassure another person of your value. You do not feel the need to over-explain your intentions, justify your boundaries, or prove your loyalty through excessive emotional displays. This naturally creates a different relational rhythm, one that feels calm, steady, and grounded. However, this same calmness can create tension with individuals who are accustomed to relationships built on frequent validation, emotional reassurance, and reactive communication. To someone who has not developed their own internal stability, your composed presence may feel distant, confusing, or even unsettling. They may interpret your self-containment as a lack of interest, when in truth it is simply a refusal to engage in emotional dependency. For those who possess emotional maturity, your presence feels grounding, safe, and deeply reassuring, precisely because it does not fluctuate with mood, insecurity, or external pressure. You are not withholding validation as a strategy, manipulation, or power move. You simply do not require it to feel secure within yourself. This creates a relational posture that is balanced rather than dependent, where connection is chosen freely instead of driven by fear of abandonment or the need for reassurance. Over time, this psychological independence protects you from emotional volatility, drama, and unstable attachment patterns. It allows you to observe rather than react, to respond rather than chase, and to build connections based on genuine alignment rather than insecurity. In this way, the Sigma male's quiet self-sufficiency is not a barrier to intimacy, but a filter that ensures only emotionally grounded, self-aware individuals are able to truly meet you where you stand. Point 5. You adapt without announcing it. Change for you is not a public event, but a private discipline, something that unfolds inwardly long before it becomes visible on the outside. You learn quietly, absorbing information without the need to declare that you are growing. You adjust your thinking, refine your habits, and correct your course without announcing that a correction is being made. This is not secrecy driven by fear, but restraint guided by clarity. You understand that not every process benefits from observation, and that too much visibility invites opinions, projections, and resistance that add no value to the work itself. By keeping your evolution internal, you preserve mental space. You are able to think without interruption, to test ideas without pressure, and to discard what no longer serves you without having to explain yourself. Over time, this quiet refinement compounds. Small, consistent adjustments reshape your behavior, your standards, and your decision-making. Because there is no performance involved, the change is efficient and precise. When others eventually notice the difference, it often feels abrupt to them, as if you transformed overnight. What they do not see is the long stretch of deliberate effort that preceded the outcome. This gap between perception and reality works in your favor. It allows you to move ahead without triggering comparison or competition. You are not interested in signaling improvement, because signaling consumes energy that could be invested in actual growth. Instead, you focus on embodiment. Your competence becomes evident through calm execution, not verbal assertion. You do not announce readiness, you act from it. This creates a quiet authority that does not demand attention, yet naturally commands respect. People sense that something has shifted even if they cannot pinpoint when or how it happened. This pattern reflects a long-term orientation toward life itself. You are building stability, not moments. By minimizing unnecessary exposure, you reduce friction, avoid distraction, and protect your psychological focus. Your progress remains intact because it is not dependent on external validation. It is anchored in internal alignment. Over time, this way of moving through the world creates a reputation for reliability and depth. You are seen as someone who adapts without drama, advances without noise, and improves without needing permission. In a culture that often confuses visibility with value, your restraint becomes a quiet advantage. Your change speaks for itself, not through explanation, but through the undeniable consistency of your actions. Point 6. You feel fully responsible for your life. Perhaps the most defining internal experience of the Sigma male is the quiet, unwavering acceptance of complete responsibility for his life. This is not a slogan or a motivational posture. It is a deeply internalized stance toward reality. You do not externalize blame, even when circumstances are objectively unfair or structurally limiting. You are capable of recognizing flawed systems, biased environments, and unequal starting points, yet you refuse to allow these factors to become the authors of your identity or the final explanation for your outcomes. This mindset is demanding precisely because it removes the comfort of excuses. There is no psychological refuge in blaming timing, people, luck, or fate. Every result, whether favorable or painful, is examined for what it reveals about your decisions, your preparation, and your response. And yet, within this severity lies an unexpected freedom. Responsibility grants agency, and agency grants freedom. When you fully accept that your responses are yours alone, you reclaim control over your inner world, regardless of external volatility. You understand that resentment is a deceptive emotion. It feels justified, but it quietly drains energy while producing no meaningful change. Accountability, by contrast, is efficient. It concentrates effort only where action is possible and releases you from the mental noise of grievance. This perspective rarely develops early in life. It often emerges after repeated disappointment, after witnessing the long-term erosion of character in those who habitually avoid responsibility, or after prolonged observation of how entitlement corrodes discipline. At some point, you consciously choose the heavier path, not because it is noble, but because it is clear. Comfort obscures reality. Responsibility clarifies it. Over time, what once felt like a burden becomes stabilizing. Responsibility stops feeling like a weight and starts functioning like a structure. It anchors your decisions, simplifies your priorities, and eliminates the need for constant justification. You no longer require validation to proceed because your internal logic is coherent. This is why the Sigma male appears calm under pressure and unmoved by chaos. His life may not be easy, but it is aligned. And alignment, more than ease, is what produces long-term strength, consistency, and quiet authority. This concludes the core reflection, and if these internal experiences resonate with you, they are not a mark of superiority, nor a sentence of isolation from others, but an indication of a psychological orientation shaped by autonomy, restraint, and internal coherence. This orientation reflects a preference for self-directed meaning rather than external validation, and for measured responses rather than impulsive reactions. The Sigma male path is not loud, performative, or dependent on recognition. It does not announce itself or seek affirmation. Instead, it unfolds quietly through consistent decisions, disciplined self-regulation, and an ability to remain internally stable regardless of external pressure. Over time, this quiet consistency compounds, forming a grounded, reliable strength that does not need to be proven, defended, or explained, but simply lived and embodied through everyday conduct.